August 1944. Allied tanks stand silent, not for lack of courage, but for want of fuel. The official story of victory skips the crisis where 12,000 tons were needed daily, yet barely a third arrived. One train carried what 100 trucks could not, but 2/3 of France's rails were shattered. How did a single wartime railway rebuild decide the fate of a continent? And what chance did the Allies have before the trains ran again? 12,000 tons. That was the daily minimum for the Allied armies surging across France in August 1944. But the supply columns delivered less than 4,500 tons on most days, leaving over half the front line's needs unmet. Tanks sat idle, their crews waiting for fuel that never came. Ammunition dumps ran dry. Truck convoys running day and night clogged narrow roads and burned through gasoline faster than it could be replaced. The Red Ball Express, famous for its speed and determination, could not bridge the gap. Even at full throttle, 100 trucks could not match the load of a single train. Reports from the front describe battalions forced to halt, their advance stalled not by German resistance, but by the simple math of distance and supply. Commanders sent urgent messages back to headquarters, warning that the offensive would grind to a halt unless a new solution was found. The maps showed the problem in stark relief. Every mile forward stretched the trucks thinner. Every gallon delivered meant another left behind. The question confronting Allied leadership was no longer how to defeat the enemy, but how to keep their own armies moving. Without a way to move mountains of fuel, shells, and food, the liberation of Europe threatened to collapse under its own weight. Quartermaster officers tallied the numbers and found an inescapable truth. Trucks alone could never keep pace with the needs of a modern army on the move. Every day, convoys stretched for miles, but the math was unforgiving. A single train loaded to capacity could carry as much as 100 trucks. Even the most heroic efforts of the Red Ball Express fell short of what rail could deliver in a single run. In Sicily the year before, American railway battalions had trains moving within 24 hours of landing. By the third day, they were shifting over 3,400 tons daily, using just a fraction of the track needed in France. The difference was staggering. Trains moved tanks, fuel, and ammunition faster, safer, and with far less manpower than endless convoys. Roads crumbled under the strain, vehicles broke down, and every extra mile meant more gasoline, burned just to haul gasoline forward. The promise of the railway loomed large. One train could replace dozens of convoys, freeing up men and machines for the fight ahead. But as commanders looked to the rail map for answers, they faced a new problem, one that would test the limits of Allied engineering and resolve. Railway depots across northern France became graveyards. Charred locomotives lay half-buried in rubble, their boilers split open by explosives or strafed by machine gun fire. The main lines, once the arteries of Europe, were twisted and broken, with more than 2/3 rendered unusable by the summer of 1944. Bomb craters pocked the embankments for miles. Where tracks crossed rivers, only skeletal remains of bridges jutted from the water. At least 125 major crossings had been blown apart in just 2 months. Retreating German forces left behind a trail of destruction. Rails ripped from their beds, tunnels collapsed with dynamite, and switchyards mined or set ablaze. In the sidings, over 8,000 carriages and wagons sat immobilized, some gutted by fire, others booby-trapped or riddled with shrapnel. French railway workers, many fresh from years of sabotage against the occupiers, Alsace now walked the lines in silence, counting losses and searching for anything salvageable. Official reports from SNCF depots described a patchwork of impassable gaps and hazards that stretched from Normandy to the Seine. The scale of devastation defied belief. Maps once dense with rail lines now showed only dead ends and blank spaces. For every promise of a supply train rolling east, there stood the reality of a network in ruins. Orders from headquarters gave the railway engineers just 30 days to bring the network back to life. Major General Clarence Burpee, a veteran railroad man, took command of the effort, working alongside French managers like Louis Armand, himself only months removed from leading acts of sabotage against the Germans. Crews of American GIS, British sappers, and French cheminots labored side by side, often on just a few hours of sleep, racing against an impossible clock. Every morning meant new reports of mines to clear, rails to straighten, and bridges to rebuild. The most daunting challenge came at Mantes-la-Jolie, where the Seine Bridge had been reduced to twisted steel and shattered stone. Over 300 engineers and railway workers, including former resistance fighters, assembled at the site. Bailey Bridge sections arrived by boat under the cover of darkness. For 72 hours, teams worked under sniper fire and the constant threat of air raids. 6 men were lost before the last panel locked into place. At 3:15 a.m. on August 31st, the first supply train crossed the new span. Exhausted men cheered as the whistle echoed over the river. Across northern France, similar scenes played out. Tracks relaid, embankments rebuilt, locomotives coaxed back to life. The cost was high, but within a month, trains were rolling again, carrying hope and supplies east toward the front. By September, the rails across northern France thundered with a new rhythm. The Allied military railway service logged nearly 15,000 tons of supplies, moving east every day. 3 times what the best road convoys could deliver on their busiest runs. Freight yards that had been silent and gutted in August now pulsed with activity. As depot crews worked around the clock to sort ammunition, fuel drums, and rations bound for the front, locomotives, coaxed back to life by teams of engineers and French cheminots, hauled endless lines of flat cars stacked with tanks and trucks, each train replacing 100 convoys that once clogged the roads. The liberation of Paris came not just through the courage of its citizens, but on the steel rails feeding the city from the west. In the weeks after the first supply trains rolled across the rebuilt Seine bridges, Allied units found themselves fueled, armed, and ready to advance. Tonnage logs from SHAEF headquarters told the story. Every day, more than 300 loaded cars reached the forward depots, keeping General Patton's tanks rolling and the push toward Germany alive. SHAEF's logistics staff, once buried in crisis memos, now tracked a surge in operational flexibility. The Red Ball Express slowed as railways took over the heavy loads, freeing up trucks for the final dash to the front. With the rails restored, Allied commanders regained the power to shift men and material faster than the enemy could react. The offensive, once threatened by empty fuel tanks and silent guns, gathered pace with every whistle and every mile of track reclaimed. December 1944 brought the coldest winter in decades and a sudden, violent reversal. German tanks punched through the Ardennes, catching the Allies off guard and driving a wedge into the front lines. The roads froze and buckled under snow, trucks stalled or slid off embankments, and the entire supply chain threatened to snap. In the chaos, orders raced down the line. 4 entire divisions had to be redeployed to the southern flank, and fast. The only hope was the railway. Crews worked through blizzards, shoveling snow from the tracks by hand, lanterns flickering in the icy wind. Locomotives, their boilers straining, pulled loaded troop cars through the night. Within 48 hours, trains delivered Patton's Third Army, men, tanks, and artillery, straight to the edge of the bulge. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne clung to survival, surrounded and running low on everything. As soon as the siege lifted, supply trains pushed forward, carrying ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies to the battered town. Some cars rolled so close to the guns that crews could hear the shells bursting ahead. Railwaymen braved strafing runs and artillery fire to keep the lines open. For soldiers trapped in the snow, the distant whistle of a train meant hope wasn't lost. The winter campaign proved what no staff report could. When the fate of an army hung by a thread, it was the railway that held the line. By September 1944, Allied supply trains were moving over 15,000 tons a day, more than triple the deliveries possible by truck just weeks earlier. This dramatic turnaround was only possible because engineers, railway workers, and frontline crews rebuilt two-thirds of a shattered French rail network in just 30 days, restoring 125 bridges and thousands of miles of track under fire. Archival records show these rail lines enabled the rapid liberation of Paris and proved decisive during the Battle of the Bulge, when 4 divisions were rushed by rail to the front in 48 hours. Yet not all details are fully known. Some operational documents and logistical plans remain classified or lost. Still, the evidence is clear. It was logistics, not just firepower, that determined the pace and outcome of the Allied advance. Today, military and disaster planners still study these records, drawing lessons from the relentless teamwork and engineering behind every mile of track. In the end, the story of this train is a reminder that in war, movement and supply can change history as surely as any weapon.